Welcome to Used Car News Podcast. Used Car News is your top source for fast and reliable news that car dealers can rely on for this evolving industry. Here are this month's top stories. Used retail sales rise. Retired remarketer trades in ties for Tureens. Economist hangs up his analytics. But first, we sit down with Scott Vanner, Senior Analyst of Economic and Industry Insights.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Bellant. I'm Managing Editor of Used Car News, and this is the Used Car News Podcast. Closing out the year this year, we have a great guest. We got Scott Vanner. He is Senior Analyst of Economic and Industry Insights at Cox Automotive, so he's the man with all the info. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Cox had their kind of big year-end forecast and review yesterday on the call. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, if it's okay with you, Scott. So for you, what were some of the things that jumped out at you out of these year-end numbers and these last quarter numbers?
Really, it's been sort of surprising how we got back to normal. That was a little surprising, how we started the year. There's a lot of higher depreciation than we thought in regular MMR values. Then, there was a muted spring bounce and tax season. And then right around July, August, everyone started seeing the lease returns not coming back. So we just started shooting back up. And now with the MMR levels, we're right about normal. So
yeah. That's what was interesting. It was like you saw this graph, kind of like a heart monitor. And in the end, he said like 91% of where we were is kind of where we normally are. It just took a crazy path to get here.
Yeah.
So now, obviously, the lower lease maturities are a big deal and this year, and obviously going to be a bigger deal next year. But the demand, I guess, was higher than normal here at this time of the year.
Yeah, there's a lot of demand still, both in wholesale and used market, which is a little surprising. But, inventory is tight. So dealers are trying to get inventory onto their lots, trying to get ahead of the game. There's a lot of uncertainty around next year and, what's going to happen with the different changes. We're seeing more demand with like used EVs. So it's just a lot going on.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's interesting with the used EVs. I know that's not what we're going to talk about, but I was looking at like typically, and we'll talk about that in terms of incentives. But on the EV incentives, it's like holy cow! It's like something like near 15%. They said yesterday, which wow, that's huge.
Yeah, and we were actually talking about this in our meeting the other day. There might be bigger effects. They put in that incentive, the cars under 25,000. So all of a sudden, used EVs all starting being listed around under 25,000. So that's like That's that marker. We don't know where that's going to go.
Yeah, that's important because you're right. The incentives on the new EVs don't necessarily help used unless it just affects the values that you're dropping off when they go to used car market, I should say. Now, in terms of used vehicle sales, we saw an increase, correct? It was like 13% higher I saw than last year, if that makes sense. That's right.
Yeah, that's right. And especially for this time of year, we're seeing pretty strong sales. It's still below pre-pandemic levels, but, far higher than the last couple of years.
Yeah. And again, specifically kind of related to the end of this year or to this quarter, because it sounds like full quarter, I believe you guys said it was 3% higher than last year. But just in this last quarter, it was up double digits.
Yep, up double digits.
Okay. And now, in terms of demand, we see strong demand. What is that from? Is that just kind of connected to supply, or is it just consumer confidence or interest rates? What works into that?
I think a lot of it is supply. 3 years ago, or during the pandemic, they weren't making cars. Those cars are never going to be made. We talk a lot about the off-lease maturities hitting the used market because those are, bread and butter cars for the used market. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is no cars were being made, so supply is just going to keep being constrained.
Yeah, and that's what I know that you guys reported yesterday was that even with interest rates falling, which will help keep sales good on the used car side, it's the supply that's going to keep used sales from growing meaningfully, I think was the word they used.
Yeah.
So for you guys, what in interest rates, it is something keeping our eye on. I know the Fed, I think, has a meeting today as we record this. You guys have any insight of interest rates in terms of how that's working in this whole situation?
So, interest rates, well, they're like connected to what the Fed does.
Mm-hmm.
With auto loans, it's kind of more of a long-term sort of view.
Gotcha.
And so I think our perspective is it's not going to provide as much relief as it's not going to be a one-in-one step with the Fed. So it'll help, but it's not going to be these crazy rate changes that really help with affordability.
Yeah, it was interesting. He went through the whole idea about interest rates, and then we had, incentives. Incentives now went way up, and then of course that affects used sales and supply. Where are we at in that area in terms of incentives and new car, used car thing?
So in terms of incentives, I know new car for the percentage of incentives is right about the same that it was before the pandemic. But, new cars are a lot more expensive now.
Right.
So while sorry, I got that backwards. The cash amount is about the same. The percentage amount is still getting there.
Oh, right. That makes sense.
Right. So I think they have some way to go. New inventory is looking healthy and affordability remains an issue. So if they really want to move those units, they're going to have to
absolutely
incentives.
And on the used car side, that's what we hope, because then we get more cars in the market on our end.
Right. It'll trickle down.
Now, they said that you guys reported that used car day supply was at 46 days, which they said is it typical, correct, for this time of year?
Yeah, it's a lot lower than we typically see at this time of year. We've seen lower day supply through the year.
Oh,
but
that's what it was. Right.
Yeah. So it's a lot tighter than what we normally see right now. Inventory is still tight and sales are still going strong into the end of the year.
On the used car values, where are we at on used car values? Are they higher than typical at this time of year or about the same?
So I know we released the Manheim Used Vehicle Value Index, the halfway point last year, and it was up 0.7% from last year.
Right.
I'd say they're about normal for this time of year. Again, it's kind of like a lot of depreciation beginning of the year, then sort of that bounce back up. And we're just kind of seeing lower depreciation right now because of the constraints in supply and the higher sales conversion and buying activity.
For you, when you look at things, what are some of the trends that you look at on the used car side and you monitor, and anything that jumps out at you or anything that you're seeing as we end this year, maybe looking ahead towards next year?
I look at a lot of different factors, and inventory is definitely a big one. Prices, just the overall average used price, I find pretty interesting, because even though used cars are, lasting longer and it's a tight supply, so it's harder to get new cars. Those new cars that were made a few years ago that are starting to get their way into the used car market were a lot more expensive. So they're just going to keep that average used price up and even, kicking it up. So
it's a challenge. Yeah, I know it's a challenge talking to our independent dealers on those prices, and it's both the prices and supply. Obviously, I think that's why it's like that.
Yeah.
And of course, the other issue, the big issue for next year, and of course this year and going to next year, is lease maturities. Obviously, we didn't have those big lease sales a couple of years ago. We're still not at that new cycle yet, correct?
Correct. I'd like to find the exact number, but we're down pretty significantly in what we're expecting for the next couple years. So those are already cars that it's tough for them to get back into the market, and there's just not a lot, and it's going to be very, brand specific. Some people were selling more cars in the off lease, but are leasing more cars, but there's just not going to be as many.
Yeah, and that affects everything, affects the prices and the whole deal. For you, anything else that's jumping out at you that you're looking at in terms of either supply or sales on the used car side? Again, I think we've kind of talked a little bit about each of those things. For you, anything else that you're looking at specifically?
Specifically, That is a lot of it. I think we're just trying to figure out these different trends. They're bucking the seasonal norms. They're kind of just, day supply is tighter than normal at this time of year. And I think some of that has to do with, the hurricanes kind of pushing stuff around and, people buying new cars. So we're kind of just tracking it all, trying to figure out where values are going. We're not expecting huge shifts in values, depreciation next year because the tightness in supply, but it's sort of what's actually going to happen.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so let's just we'll review a little bit. Obviously, incentives are going to have an effect, and then interest rates will be interesting. We hope on the used car side, I know on the dealer side, we hope that interest rates will make a difference. As you said, there's not this 1-to-1 ratio, and there's not this immediate reaction to interest rates affecting used car prices down the line. Because I know that lenders, that's a different situation, but we do hope that we can get a little bit of relief on the interest rates on the used car side, because that's a big deal, especially because supply is low, especially because prices are high. And so we'll have to definitely keep a look on that. Obviously, you guys have a forecast that was pretty good for this last quarter, and seems like pretty steady for 2025, with the exception of the lower lease maturities. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think everything, I believe that's correct. It's sort of a steady as you go type of deal, but we always have to wait to see exactly how everything plays out and where that pushes demand.
Okay, excellent. Well, Scott, I appreciate it. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, but again, folks, if you haven't seen that fourth quarter and forecast report from Cox Automotive, definitely check it out online. They have a lot of good information on there and give you a little bit of sense of where we've been and a hint at where we're going. Jonathan Smoke, your senior economist, will give you his playlist. He always like to play those little club tunes to set the themes for the following year. So definitely check that out. And Scott, we appreciate you spending time here on the Used Car News Podcast. You have a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, my friend.
Thank you. You too. And great to be here.
All right. You take care, everybody.
Coming up, a Q&A with Jeffrey and Used Car News copy editor Ed Fitzgerald. In November, retail used vehicle sales rose by 5% from October and 15% year over year, with the average retail listing price increasing by 0.4%. The days supply of used vehicles decreased to 46 days from 47 in October. New vehicle sales increased by 10.1% from last year and 1.3% from October, with a sales pace of 16.5 million. Fleet sales dropped by 4.6% year over year, while retail sales rose by 15.5% with a retail SAR of 13.6 million. Rental risk unit prices at auction increased by 0.8% year over year, with average mileage slightly up by 0.6% from last year but down 7.3% from October. Dan Kennedy, formerly in automotive remarketing, now volunteers as production coordinator for Motown Soup, a charity based at Trinity Lutheran Church in Utica, Michigan. For over 19 years, Motown Soup has donated over $2 million to nearly 100 charities. The all-volunteer group, including Kennedy's family, produces and sells a variety of dried soup mixes, dips, and baked goods to support the homeless and hungry. Volunteers, including local business employees, work in shifts to create these products, which are sold online, at craft shows, and in Michigan stores. The charity also offers creative gift packages, including themed baskets and mixes. Tom Kontos, the longtime chief economist of ADESA, is retiring on February 14th of 2025 after stepping down from his duties last summer. Known for his monthly Kontos commentary on the wholesale auto market, Kontos provided over 20 years of insights. Despite his field's dismal science reputation, Kontos maintained a positive demeanor. His career path began in mineral resource economics, working in mining before transitioning to the auto industry. Hired by ADT Automotive for his analytical skills and unbiased perspective, Kontos became a thought leader, developing market analysis and indices for the auction industry.
Welcome back, folks, to the Used Car News Podcast. We had just spoken to Scott Vanner with Cox Automotive about Cox Automotive's recent call and update of their forecast. And so I'm here now with Ed Fitzgerald, copy editor at Used Car News. How are you doing, Ed?
Not bad at all.
Awesome. So we're going to expound a little bit more on what we heard from the call that Scott was talking with us about. So I tell you what, fire away, Ed. He's gonna lead the question for this.
All right. Regarding the recent Cox Automotive Industry Insights and Forecast presentation, can you tell us what was reported regarding the used car side, such as the effect of lease maturities on used car prices?
Yeah, that's really the big thing, because we had COVID, where prices kind of went up when we had supply down with the chip situation, the chip shortage, so that supply was so down that leases went down. And so now we have leases coming back, but they're not, the maturities aren't here yet. So we're not going to see, we didn't see them really come back this year. We're not going to see them in 2025. So with those lease maturities down, supply is down. And of course, that means higher prices, lower supply. So, and of course, buyer demand, it was interesting. Buyer demand is kind of strong. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So basically the bottom line is fewer lease maturities this year, looking into next year, which affects used car supply and will affect prices. So that's something we have to look out for. Just again, the buyer demand is kind of strong at this point in the year. Okay, go ahead. Next question there, Ed.
All right. In general, how would you say, how were used car retail sales in 2024?
Yeah, it's funny. Sales, the first half of 2024 sales are estimated to be pretty high, and their sales are estimated to be 13% higher than 2023 this year, which is that's a big deal. Again, going back to not just maturities, but in general, supply remains very low. It's 8% less than last year, and used car supply is actually 28% less than pre-pandemic years. So when you think about used car dealers going into auction, trying to fill their lots, it's a challenge because, again, you have fewer new cars that were made. You have their lease maturities not coming back. So it's a big fight. The interesting thing is Jeremy Robb, who'd kind of led the used car side in the presentation for Cox, said that the used car supply right now stands at 46 days, which seems like normal to me. And what he said was that is normal except for this time of the year. He said this time of year that supply should be a little bit higher, and it's like 10 days less than what it typically is. So it kind of reflects that idea that while 46 days sounds like a lot, for this time of year, it is not.
Okay. How have incentives affected used car pricing?
Yeah, again, it goes back to when we had low to no incentives during those chip shortage. Basically, kind of cars were selling at MSRP. So of course that means the price of used cars are going to drop. Now, over the last 2 years, they said that over the last 2 years, incentives has slowly gone up. So the incentives going up, of course, now will increase the price of values of used cars. And according to Rob, higher retail prices have been going up every week since September. So it's something that sounds bad for used car dealers. The hope is that with these interest rates going down, and as we record this podcast, Chairman Powell had just said that they've lowered the benchmark 0.25%, so that cut interest rates 0.25%. And Rob said basically, if we're going to get some stability or lower used car prices, it's going to be on the interest rate side. So that's good news.
All right. What's the latest scoop on electric vehicles?
Yeah, I thought the electric report was kind of neat because for the last few years, we keep hearing about these huge percentages going up and stuff. And of course, percentages are all relative. I mean, if you're starting from zero percentages, 500% doesn't mean a lot. But now we're getting into, I think, an ideal, more realistic EV market. And so they are increasing. That I think they said that the EV market share is now at 8% in the entire market. So that's I think significant. And I think it was up 1.3% in 2024. Interesting, Ed, that with all the talk about Tesla, I think it actually lost market share this year. Tesla makes up nearly 50% of EV market. Ford, I think, is second at 6.8, and Tesla's at 49.5. So Tesla's still the big dog on the porch here. And then the other thing is, we noticed that the average price of incentives, that's what it is. The average incentives of EVs are, to me, crazy high. Like the average incentives now, it started in January, it was 10.2% of the price of the car. Now the incentive rate as of November 2024 was nearly 15% or $8,200. Wow. So I think a lot of that boost in EVs is from incentives. And I mean, it's like they say, if you want something to grow, incentivize it or subsidize it. And that's what they're doing with the used cars, or the EV cars, I should say.
All right. What kind of forecast did Cox provide for 2025?
Yeah, this is good. You know, we thought a while back when we hit like 10 million cars for the year that, oh my goodness, when are we ever going to get to something like 16? Because I think we got to 17 once. Well, they're forecasting at 2025, 16.3 million new car sales in 2025. So that's huge. Again, and remember that includes fleets. So fleets are going to make up 3 million of those sales. So the actual retail sales is going to be forecasted 13.3 million. And the percentage of fleets are supposed to go up. In fact, the percentage out of all these little segments are expected to go up, except for CPO, certified pre-owned, is forecast at 2.5 million, which will be down 1.6% from this year. And of course, I think a lot of that has to do with leases. They talk about they really have to qualify to be a CPO. It has to be a certain amount of miles or whatever. And It's interesting. I didn't ask him this, but it is interesting because groups like the NIDA now are having their own certified pre-owned program, so they can kind of fudge around with the miles and the age of the car. So it'll be interesting, what that does, because that is a kind of a separate figure. But they do say that the lease penetration for 2025 is going to be at 25%. Now I know at the highest it's gotten to high like low 30s, so 25% probably still not as high as it's been, but higher than last year is what they say. And then used car retail, they will be at 20.1 million in 2025. So, I mean, it looks like, things are looking up. It's just a matter of, I think, affordability and supply will still be an issue in the upcoming year. And
that's all I got for you, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I do want to end, it is the holidays, it's Christmas. We just got through a contentious election. And so I wanted to end on a high note. So I was thinking about, NAAA had a great panel of Hall of Fame auction folks. So they had like Jay Cadigan, Charlotte Pyle, Bob McConkey, Jack Nesh. And then, of course, they had our own Tony Morby, who's our columnist here. And there's nobody who has a better way with words than Tony Morby. And so I want to end on a Tony Morby quote, because I want people to know that even though we're in this car and auction business, it's so competitive that this time of year, we got to bring ourselves together and think of positivity and closeness. And so I want to quote you from what Tony Morby said during this panel. He was talking about competition with other people, and Daryl Sicoli, everybody in the auction business knows who Daryl Sicoli was. He wanted to quote in a conversation he had with Daryl Sicoli back in the heyday of his career. And he said, "Daryl, I love you like a brother, but I'd slit your throat for one more car." That's Tony Morby, not me. So, on behalf of Used Car News, we wish you guys a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thanks for listening to Used Car News Podcast. Each month, we'll bring you fast and reliable news that car dealers can rely on for this evolving industry. For a free subscription of Used Car News, please go to usedcarnews.com. This podcast is a production of BG Ad Group. Make sure to share us on social media and like and follow wherever you get your podcasts.